physiological and a psychological response to any deeply upsetting or threatening situation. These situations can range from child abuse or neglect, or to a serious car wreck or a death. Ongoing adversity such as discrimination, bullying, poverty, or community violence can also cause trauma. So when you think of trauma, if you think of a record on an old record player, or what's come back as a new record player, it is like getting stuck in a groove. And so it wears a groove in the brain, and so all of a sudden you're stuck there. And your emotions, events, and thoughts, or even touch can trigger it. 3 out of 5 Georgians have experienced significant childhood trauma.
So you guys filled out that questionnaire for us, right? How many of you guys felt resistance? I know I looked at you and said, and I feel like I have to say it or else no one's going to fill it out. But how many of you looked at me after I said, hey, we're not going to look at this, we're not going to have you talk about it, we're not going to do any of those things, and thought, well, maybe they will. I don't know if I want people to see what's on the sheet paper. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
We are going to ask you guys to participate, just like you have your students participate in class, so please answer when you see fit. How many of you wondered what we would do with the information that you provided?
I think as an adult I did, but I think as a kid I would definitely want to know.
Yeah. Ms. McLean, did you have something?
I was just curious why we need to know about personal.
Yeah. How many of you guys had flashes or flashbacks or anything along those lines when you answered one of those questions? Yeah, that's normal. That is a part of this process. And how many of you guys, after having that, felt a little bit more on edge? Most of us, right?
Yeah, most of us.
So we're not asking you to share. We're not asking you to tell personal stories. We're not asking you to go into any of those things. The only thing that we wanted to talk about is the actual number. And the number can range from a lot of different things because there's a lot of different questions on there. But the number is just to kind of acknowledge that, trauma does happen. So before I jump to the next slide, why do you guys think that we are not allowed, based on research, to give these questionnaires to kids?
It causes secondary trauma.
Yep.
It causes a recall. We can have mood destabilization, we can have a flashback, we can have all sorts of different things come of this, and that's what they found over time. With adults, y'all have the part of your brain is functioning where you can fully take over control here and say, that's not happening now, I'm in a safe place, and that almost happens automatically, but for kids, unfortunately,
It doesn't.
So, how many of you guys had 2 to 3 aces on there? So just raise your hands as I go through. How many of you guys had 4 to 5 aces? How many of you guys had 6 to 7? And then 8 plus. Okay, so in our population here at school, if you were thinking of your kids that you have in your classrooms, what range would you say number-wise that we have here in our school? Would it be 2 to 3, 4 to 5, 6 to 7, 8 plus? What is that general average of students in your classroom?
4 to 5. 6 to 7.
I say 6, 7.
So typically what we see is between 5 and 8. So y'all are all in a really good place with that guess. That says that you definitely know your students and you know our population. So I'll use the word fight, flight, and freeze a lot in this presentation. I'm going to talk about it a lot. But this is just the key response. This is something that a lot of our kids, when we go into experiencing or re-experiencing trauma, they hit one of those type of responses. And for some of those kids, it looks a little different than what you would expect. And I think we've talked about this enough with teachers that I think that you guys are on the same page and know that. But sometimes it's harder to, in the moment when someone just got in a fist fight with someone else, to recognize that that could be a cause for what triggered some of this stuff. Okay, so.
And that it's more acceptable to fight.
So what Ms. Frye is talking about is they know what's going to happen when they go and punch someone else. Like if I've gotten in fights before and I'm just mad and Hutch says something wrong to me, and my dad had done something this morning that I really am really frustrated about, I might go and pop him in the face just to deal with it. Just to deal with that anger inside of me, okay? Not even thinking once or twice to the consequences, because I know the consequences of talking about what happened at home are 100 times what would happen if I punched him in the face. Does that make sense? Because they know what to expect. They know what that pathway looks like. And that's why that trauma just kind of keeps going round and round. It doesn't move. It stays in that one groove. It is safer to talk, it is safer to take that action than to actually talk about it with someone who is safe. Unfortunately, that's where a lot of our kids are at.
A lot of times we don't see the flight. We don't realize that they're in flight because they're sleeping in class. They're not really interacting with others. They just seem withdrawn. That can be a response too. Sometimes we think they should be acting up, but they're not always acting up. They're withdrawn as well.
So the fight, flight, and freeze is the autonomic nervous system taking over and moving the kid towards safety, moving the kid towards a space where they're gonna ideally be safer, because it knows what to expect, it knows what's going on. It's not really they think to do this, it's their body is responding, their body is reacting. The autonomic nervous system is in charge of the heart, the lungs, the temperature of the skin. It's in charge of your heart rate. It's in charge of the muscle tightness. It actually reduces your pain receptors. It does all this stuff automatically. You don't have to think to make it do these things. And it also takes over and takes charge when a kid gets activated and falls into this trauma response. Also, when this trauma response kicks in, a already hormone-laden brain gets pumped with more hormones, a stress hormone called cortisol. And it's overwhelming. That's what I want you guys to hear more than anything else. And it doesn't have the higher order functions. It can't think through things. It can't process through things. And a lot of my kids that I've had and I've worked with outside of here with extreme abuse are stuck and stay in that place for long periods of time. Not just 20 minutes, not just 30 minutes, not just a day. They live there. And it's really hard for us as adults to recognize, hey, this could be something else when they're acting like a goofball in front of us. All right, quick video.
When customers are dissatisfied with your service, their feelings can run high. They may have emotional outbursts which seem impossible to deal with. Understanding why people have emotional outbursts can help us control them. Put simply, the amygdala is the emotional center of the brain and the cortex is the thinking area. In particularly stressful or intense situations, the amygdala takes over the cortex, preparing us for fight or flight, and it makes it difficult for us to use intelligence or reasoning. This is known as the amygdala hijack. During an amygdala hijack, adrenaline is released and stays in the body for about 18 minutes. Here's an example of the amygdala hijack in action. The amygdala hijack is characterized by 3 signs: a strong emotional reaction, a sudden onset, and regretting your actions later. Any strong emotion can trip off the amygdala and impair the cortex's working memory. Rationality is overwhelmed by emotions and stops us from being able to think clearly. If you have an emotional outburst, you can regain control by forcing the thinking part of your brain into action. By labeling your emotions, you can reduce their intensity and return some of the activity back to the cortex, thus increasing cognitive control. The technique of giving assertive feedback is a good way to force the thinking part of your brain to analyze the situation. To do this, you identify how you feel, what is the emotion, about what event or behavior caused it, and why. Why did that event cause that emotion? Simply identifying these things will help you think rationally about them and help you control the amygdala hijack. Saying these things out loud will let others know how you feel. You can also help others regain control if they are experiencing an amygdala hijack. Just label the emotions you think they are feeling by empathizing with them. To empathize with the other person, identify how they feel, what is the emotion, about what event or behavior caused it, and why. Why did that event cause that emotion? Then say these things out loud to the other person. For example, I can tell you're frustrated, that I was at lunch when you called. I realise you wanted a quick answer. Then pause to let your message sink in and to stop you from saying but. This forces the person to switch on their cortex in order to be able to understand your words. It also reassures them that you have an appreciation of their feelings and situation.
Okay, so
If a kid is triggered, they should be telling us, right? No.
So a lot of times these kids are going to have this stuff happen, like in that situation where we saw the guy get the egg put on his head. It's from point A to point B. Like, you know that got put on his head, he got frustrated, he hit the guy. That's a public official trying to campaign. That happened. He should be able to process through that, right? As an adult. Right?
There's a lot of people, I mean, I've seen adults that have personal space, and like as soon as you touch their personal space, their first knee-jerk reaction is to swing. You know, like, all I did was brush up against you, I'm sorry. But for just, their first instinct is to...
Why?
They want to protect themselves. I mean, there's a lot of people who, the closer you get to them, the more they tense up. And you see the hands go from here to here, as soon as you get closer and closer to them.
A lot of times, even adults struggle with that process. And I'll get into talking about more of the brain chemistry a little bit later, but we struggle to stop that automatic response. Just like we can't stop our heartbeat. That's not a possibility that we really have unless we do something physical to ourselves. We can't think to stop it. We can't always stop this emotional hijack. We can't stop going down to that space that's going to keep us safe. It triggers, it activates because of things that have happened in the past. It triggers because of emotions. It triggers because of smells. It triggers because of a zillion different things. And we can't always tell from point A to point B. That's why it came on. Does that make sense?
And that's why, we talk a lot about space, respecting space. Some kids you can go up to and you can give them a hug because you've got a really good relationship with them. Other kids, man, I can't go near them. That's just, you have to know your kids. And some kids, because of what they've been through, you can't get in their space until they feel safe. And it may never be. They may never feel safe with you.
And there's other sides of that too. The initial question is they should be able to tell us when they go there, right? No. A lot of times they don't know that they're going there. A lot of times they don't know that that's a trigger, that that's something that has moved into that place. They can't stop because they're already in a safe place. They're already backed up to that lower part of their brain. They can't stop and tell you from a cognitive standpoint, which is the front part of the brain, hey, I got activated because my dad yelled at me this morning and I had a quick flashback of when he used to hit me. They can't look at you and tell you that. That's not something that's even there. And even if they wanted to tell you that, a lot of times those kids can't tell you that because they don't know what you're going to do with that information. They don't know if you're calling defects. They don't know if you're calling mom. They don't know if you're going to spread it to the rest of the kids in the building. They don't know where that goes. So they have all these reasons to not talk to you guys about it, to not move in that direction, and to engage that fear because that's where they're at in their part of their brain. They can't think through it. So it makes it really complicated to help it.
So they're going to come back in and to be in that safety zone because that is going to keep them, whatever that is, that's going to keep them where they're comfortable.
Most of those kids will have some sort of response to you. We've seen a huge number of kids, for whatever reason, move to, hey, I've got a panic attack, I'm having an anxiety attack right now. That's their response to you. That's what they have been taught, and they've learned to just say, hey, back off. Hey, I don't know what's going on right now. I'm really struggling. Just give me some space. We've got kids that are smart enough to be able to say, and I had one do this the other day to a teacher, and I was laughing. They looked at the teacher and said, hey, I had a trigger go off. It was a trauma trigger. I just need some space. That's a kid that's been educated. That's a kid that's kind of talked to us and has learned that process. But the kid still didn't really know what to do in that moment. And the teacher hearing that is like, what? And then we have the kid, as the example that we used earlier on, that's just going to go and just haul off and hit someone because they don't know what to do with all this.
Or they gotta go to the nurse, or they gotta go home because they're having a panic attack and they're having heart issues.
Now you guys are really good about communicating with us and letting us know if you feel like something else is going on underneath or whatever, or when you send them down to the nurse, you send them down to the nurse and you just say, hey, Miss Sean, Miss Debbie, you may want to check on them. But we encourage you guys to always make sure and just shoot us an email if you feel like something's fishy. Typically speaking, on a kid that's anxious or having a panic attack, it's about 20 minutes to calm them down, to get them out of that super hijack spot. And then for a lot of kids, it's 10 minutes to reprocess. Some kids, it's a lot longer than that just because of how far into that trauma they are. Does that make sense?
And part of it is the longer we work with them, the more comfortable they get with us.
And the quicker they move through that route, the quicker they will jump back. The first time is always kind of hectic. Second time, hectic. And we start to kind of get closer and closer. Now, we're not perfect. Yeah, they will manipulate us. They have manipulated us. You guys can probably raise your hands and say this one did that. But we are moving towards that. And if you feel like there's some manipulation involved, just throw it in our direction so we know, and we're processing through that ourselves. I had a teacher do that before, and I was like, okay, well, let me think through that. And I started working, and I identified it. I realized it. And I said, to the kid, I know you're manipulating this. I want to be here for you, but you're misusing it right now. And I moved the kid on, and then come to find out they went to Miss Frye like 5 minutes later. So we are trying to communicate. We're trying to keep them in your classes, but obviously if they're in that lower part of the brain, they're not learning very well. And I'll talk about that.
And they will play, they will play us against each other just like they play you against. And we just, sometimes we don't hardly talk until we realize something has happened, so keep us informed, because when they go like to one of us and then the other, and yours was a really good example, Miss McElhaney, the fact that the student, I don't normally see him, and he said Miss Frye said I can come down there anytime, but I don't normally see him, and so, I felt like he's trying to play us against you. And I thought the way you handled it really well, I think you acknowledged it and then you could move on. And sometimes that's the key. Yeah, I know you're struggling, but we've got to get this work done. And sometimes that works, sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes they're so off. But know that a lot of times just acknowledging it helps them.
And you're not always going to, and I hope I'm getting this across, but you're not always going to see a trauma trigger. You're not always going to see an event that caused this. You're not always going to hear that. You're not always going to know that that's happening. And I hope I'm getting that through to you guys. Traumatic events happen. They happen outside of here. Obviously, there are things that we cannot control in these kids' lives. But the associations that come out of that are crazy. I had a kid tell me once, a little girl that was extremely, went through every abuse you can think of. And she looked at me, and the parents were having some really, really difficult problems. She had been adopted at that point. She was completely out of that situation, had been through a few years of therapy, and they could not figure out why she just kept triggering over and over and over again. It was crazy to get down to the fact that lavender smell was triggering her out of everything else, because that was what was present when she was sent to her room and she had some situations occur. It's insane to me, the associations these kids make, but they are there and they are real.
And sometimes they can't tell us, oh, Chuck, you remind me of somebody in my family, or, you know, it's just, they will, some mannerism, and it's not anything you've done, it's just some mannerism or something you have on. And we're not saying you need to fix that, we're saying just be aware of it. That sometimes their response to you is outside anything that you've done, you know?
And a lot of these kids are lazy. They'll lay their head down, they'll go to sleep, they'll act like they don't want to do any of your work, they'll just be escaping. It's really honestly hard to determine if they just didn't get sleep at night, or if they're just being lazy, or if they're avoiding something. And we're not asking you guys to do that, we're just asking you to be aware that it could be a possibility. If I were going to ask you what is the number one reason your kids sleep in class, what is that? Stay up all night playing games. Any other suggestions?
Little brother, little sister crying all night.
Yeah, having to take care of kids. What do all those lean towards? Parental neglect. And if we have something as simple as parental neglect in place, what else can happen? As we're talking about trauma.
Anything could happen.
Yeah. And with our population, I mean, it doesn't take a whole lot of steps to quickly get to that point.
I had a student last year who told me they ate dinner at 11 o'clock at night. Got to bed at 1 o'clock. I'm like, but that's when mom served the dinner. And I'm like, you know, in my mind I'm thinking, wow, you know, no wonder they're so tired or irritable or...
And then as another example, you have the kid who's literally sitting there with the paper in front of them with the pencil in their hand, and they're staring at the sheet of paper, and they're not reading. Like I've had that kid every single year that I've been here, and it's changed. They'll change it eventually as they move on, and they feel some of y'all's connection. But that kid is literally sitting there thinking with that pencil in their hand and that test right in front of them. I can't do this.
I'm stupid.
I can't handle the math that you're putting in front of me. I'm not going to graduate. I'm not going to have a future. And they're stuck. And, you know, we preach this through capturing his hearts. We preach this through
mindsets.
The 7 mindsets. But the thing that's going to get a lot of those kids moving just a little bit is for you to step in there with that relationship and just take you first step. Hey, I noticed that you're kind of frozen on this, and just start talking to them a little bit to make them feel safe. There's some prompts in here that I'll give a little bit later that can kind of facilitate that without even having to take time out of class really to focus on that individual, but you can do the whole class. So what I'm really trying to tell you is there's all sorts of non-threatening things that can be in place that can trigger these kids to fight, flight, and freeze. And it doesn't have to be something that you associate with triggering that kid. Like, I don't have any teachers that are raising their hand like this in front of a kid. Like, that would be a direct, obvious association. And I know that's not happening, but even the simple ones that I have up here, and there's a bazillion, can trigger kids.
Just like some kids, you know, you just cannot get in their space. They're really big about their space. And even as adults, we like to have our space. So I think we have to teach our kids how, if they want a hug, to ask.
Okay, so getting into the brain process. The frontal lobes is where we do all of our thinking, right? The front part of the brain, the prefrontal cortex, all of that, that is where primary thought and learning take place. These kids that we're talking about that get kicked to the fight, flight, and freeze response system don't have access to their frontal lobes at that point in time.
They're at the back of their brain.
They're at the very back of their brain. They're in the amygdala, stuck in that autonomic nervous system. And they're struggling just to maintain calm at that point in time. So these kids are stuck in this bad place. And in the video, it was like, well, what you need to do is you need to just label that emotion, you need to kind of check in on them, you need to get them to tell you where that came from and why they think that came out. That works good with adults. It really does. But with kids, they're lacking a primary part of their brain being like fully developed.
And
It's
they're
called
not thinking logically.
Yeah, it's called the prefrontal cortex. When do you guys think that prefrontal cortex actually activates and starts to develop for kids? If you were going to give me an age, throw it out.
It's not fully developed till you're about 25.
You Googling that?
No, I know that.
When does it start to develop?
Right about middle school.
Okay.
Well,
Or towards the end of middle
start being able
school?
to identify consequences about middle school.
Towards the end of middle
Abstractly,
school, and
abstractly.
if we're,
Hold on. So give me an age. Throw out some ages.
14.
Okay. Do you guys teach 14-year-olds?
Yes.
Not technically.
A few.
No, don't teach. No,
I
7th grade teachers.
have run into at least
Y'all have
3
12
this
to
year.
13,
so-
right? Right?
Talk twice.
Sometimes.
Most of you guys have 12 to 13-year-olds. What Debbie was starting to say is it doesn't really start to kick in gear for most of these kids until 14 years old. Girls, we get lucky sometimes with girls. They'll do 13, 14, they'll start to develop that process. Ms. Shaw was 100% correct. Yes, you can Google when does the prefrontal cortex show up. And it says 25 years old. Boys are slower. It's 15 to 16. Okay, so Mr. Sean, how do we help these kids if you're saying the logical part of the process, talking through it, isn't going to help them? Because that part of the brain isn't formed. Well, go ahead.
that's where some techniques of getting them out of that can help.
That's where a lot of our activities, that's where, as you see the fidgets, the other things in front of you, can kind of help them become more in the moment. We're trying to ground them to this moment. We're kind of trying to ground them to this time, okay? We can teach them that process that they talked about as adults. We can pre-form that before the prefrontal cortex is actually involved and in place. We can start teaching them what to know, what to expect, and give them the structure of that. But for them to be able to do that themselves, for them to be able to know that pathway, for them to actually be able to move down it very quickly on their own, it's going to be a struggle until they're 14 or 15 years old. And it's not even fully formed then. I mean, you can have kids that are 18 and not even have that prefrontal cortex in gear, and they're making stupid decisions all the time.
And
They
a lot of
can't
times,
critically
more of those ACE responses that we're talking about, the more they have, the more they're going to have a hard time regulating their emotions.
So that's, and we've got strategies here towards the end, but I'll just give you this. That's where the fidgets, that's where taking walks, that's where taking breathing moments, that's where getting out and doing something kind of gets them into a different space. So put a simpler way, this concept from the upper stairs to the lower stairs, the upper brain, the prefrontal cortex, the frontal lobes, down to the lower part, the amygdala and the autonomic nervous system. That's what you're dealing with these kids. When they go downstairs, they're in survival mode. They're doing whatever they can to be present. They're not going to be able to focus for you. They're going to be activated. Well, how can I shift them from that? They've got a test in front of them, Sean. Taking walks, doing something to regulate them here in that moment and ground them to this building, that they're safe, that they're okay. Those different things will help them shift. Don't they need to talk about it before they take my test? Ideally, yes, but I can't ask that all the
Not
time.
all the time will they be able to do that.
So, the only place that a kid can truly learn and remember what you're teaching them is upstairs, in my mind. And I can throw several researchers at you guys to look into and look at what they're saying too. We don't have a whole lot of kids that get shoved so far down into the downstairs that they're in there all the time, but we do have a few. And those few take up a lot of time because it's really hard to shift. And honestly, just from their actions, just from the way that they respond in your classroom, you're going to know those kids like that because they're the ones that are pulling the majority of your time.
So, this may be a bit of a loaded question, but how much of that is nature versus nurture? Like how much of it is genetically predisposed to hang out in the lower part of the brain versus it being in the context of life experiences?
I think it's more life experiences. I really do think that a lot of times they experience these things and they are in a safety mode to stay safe because they have been in an unsafe situation. Whether it be they don't have food, you know, where's the next, you know, food? Is dad gonna come home drunk tonight? You know, just that unpredictability. They don't handle any changes very well. Kids in trauma, they don't handle, you know, I don't know how many kids have told me, I hate fire alarms. You know, like, it sets them off. And so, you know, it is, I believe it's a lot of times learned, you know. And I think it's the lack of nurturing. For a lot of these kids, they haven't got proper nurturing. The simple things.
As much as I hate to say it, the research is split. Most any therapist that you talk to is going to lean on the side that Ms. Frye is leaning on, that we believe, and that's what we have to as this field in this position, we believe that we can move those kids towards that. They're going to have a predisposition towards a resistance to resiliency. But we believe that if intervened quick enough, if moved through appropriately, if consistent enough, they move back in that direction very quickly.
So that's where like brain plasticity kind of stuff comes in, that you can rewire with the.
Well, and they say, you know, if you have that adult in your life that believes in you, just one adult in your life, that may stop those messages, I'm stupid, I'll never succeed, you know, that go over and over, and a lot of our kids, you know, or if I make a mistake, that's like, that's over, it's over, you know, like, it's so black and white.
There's a pliable portion to the brain to be able to move past those environmental struggles. If we didn't feel like that wasn't present, then these adoptive and foster kids that have been in care because they have been significantly sexually and physically abused, they wouldn't have a place to go. It would just be moving them towards the correctional facilities. And there are some, unfortunately, that does happen. But
Because I have a hard time.
there's a lot of people that move to, we can move them out. It is idealistic to move them out. There are ways to do that. And you don't have to be perfect to do it. Just maybe you have a heart.
I mean, just, you know, because I have my nieces and my nephews, and you know, like they were in a pretty traumatic situation. Like Desire, I mean, I've had them 4 years. Desire still hoards food because they didn't have any. Like she thinks like she's dumb and she can't do anything right because she struggles in school. Just because I don't know, I really think my sister was drinking. She was probably doing drugs, and so like she's just super behind in school. Like she's in the 2nd grade, but like when I'm at home, I still have her doing like pre-K and kindergarten things. So like it's ingrained in her. So you know she's sitting in a class full of, you know, grade level kids, and she can't do anything, and she's always in trouble. And I feel like the teachers don't know how to. They don't know what to do with her because she's bored, because she doesn't know. She has no idea what they're doing in there.
That's the struggle, is we see the acting out right there in that moment. We have 20 other kids that are present in this room, and we don't know that is not acting out because that kid just wants to be a class clown, or that is acting out because of other stuff that's going on. Most of us take it as, you're just being a knucklehead, a class clown, get out of here, I can't handle you right now, and they go teach the other 20 kids. What we're asking you guys to do is to look just a little deeper at that to see, is there something else? And if that teacher does that, is there something else? And you came in and you said that, they're gonna feel like a horrible person for treating that kid like a class clown. And it's one of those things. She will move. She will move in the direction that you want to. It will never be quick enough for her or the people around her, but she will continue to move, and then all of a sudden you'll see it happen like that, and she'll be on grade level, or she'll be at that level with the other kids because she feels safe enough. Foster and adoptive kids, I love them to death. That is I feel like my bread and butter when it comes to therapy. because they have had those experiences and they prove that this works because you see a snap or you see a prolonged growth over time. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of those kids drop back, and we've got some of these kids, like you can name them. We talked about Texas at different points.
Mm-hmm.
They'll act like 5-year-olds, and you're just like, come on. It's because that's where they're at in that safe part of their brain. Does that make sense? So how can we help this? Well, general prompts. And I know this is annoying. I know what I'm asking here because you guys have invited me in and let me teach in some scenarios. To take a moment in class and just take a break before that test and put on some calming music. And you're saying, okay, everyone, let's listen to this calming music. Let's remind to let things go that are outside of here. You know, you're safe. You've just got a test in front of you. You know, it's okay. I want you to do the best on this test you can, but no, we can fix this if it doesn't work right.
You have the opportunity to retest. And a lot of kids get stuck. They think, even though you guys say that, in their mind, I failed it. You know, there's no point. And they know they can retest, but it's like that, it's whining in their brain. I'm stupid. I don't know this stuff. I don't know this stuff.
So you're safe, and I'm going to support you. And I want you to take a really deep breath with me and just sing Kumbaya as a class. And then you got Texas like going nuts, bouncing in the corner. Unfortunately, in that scenario, you need to deal with the one that's chaotic if you can, and there may be 2 or 3. I don't know how this is going to go. But you give them a little bit more space to be closer to you. You try to help them calm down. You move the other kids in that direction. And you just kind of let them move forward and try to take that test. That moment of calm does a lot.
And sometimes it can be, you could put a picture up on the screen that's like a, you know, I think about, I don't know if that's it, Perna in Nepal, but I think about, you know, finding that place where their brain can go to. And I talk about that a lot. You've got to find, for me, like it's the ocean, okay? I can disassociate from everything by looking at the ocean.
And she's just talking about a safe place that is comforting and relaxing for that kid.
So it may be that, and a lot of times it's nature stuff. So, and for some kids, one kid that I worked with, it was a horse running through. She wanted a picture of this horse. And so if she looked at the horse, she could calm herself down in the classroom.
Okay, so we're going to move really quick based on time. So how do we help these kids? How do we move these kids? Well, we develop the relationships with these kids. That's what Capturing Kids' Heart, that's what 7 Mindsets has really pushed. We help build up their internal belief system. You need to think of the majority of these kids in middle school, and I hate to put it this way, but the majority of these kids is self-deprecating. I'm too small, I'm too dumb, I'm not smart. And you need to try to build them up in the different ways that you know that you can. You need to give them some initiatives. Sometimes you need to sit down with them and you need to help them start. Sometimes you need to help them answer that first question to get rolling, and then all the other pieces jump in there. And you need to help them start expressing and using feeling words. Neely has told me this before, that during good things, that he'll have the kids actually use feeling words when they're talking about their good things. I hate to say this, but we have middle schoolers who only know mad, sad, and worried. They don't know how to say, I'm overwhelmed. They don't know how to say, I'm enraged. They don't know how to say those different things because they haven't been educated on what those feelings are. That's normal stuff that happens every day at home. Like, they should be processing that with parents. They should be in the car being asked, how was your day? And they talk about that stuff during that time. But that's not happening. And it hasn't been happening for a while for a majority of our kids. So educating them, talking to them, helping them understand how to express themselves is important.
So you're going to fill their picture. That's kind of what is to build their resiliency, is to fill their picture with things to build them up.
Okay. So the rest of these slides are just suggestions, different things that you can do during that downtime. My best foot forward would be to say, Miss Mack, you got a test. After that test, or you've been working through class for 20 minutes, you take a small 30-second break, okay? and you do something silly, or you do something stupid, or you do something where they can move around, or they can do something that's going to be helpful.
30 seconds.
Oh man, come on.
30-second dance party.
And just like Mr. Hutch started dancing, you do that with them for a second. You don't have to do anything other than what Jessica is doing right here, just bobbing her head. Like, you don't have to engage and get up and like do some break moves on the floor. You just do something simple. You can if you want to, but I know if you do that in a classroom, you're just for the next 20 minutes trying to get out of those good back together. If you do this normally, if you do this at a very set time during the day or 20 minutes in or whatever that may be to kind of break things up, they will get used to it, they will learn it, and they will expect it and be excited.
And they will learn to come back down. So,
In the process of them re-engaging what you have in front of them will happen. So, we have tons of examples on here, and
making
since it
sure
is going to
kids have
share,
time, like in the morning, to socialize a little bit. You know, a kid that I was helping get to class this morning, just a minute, Ms. Frye, I gotta talk to my friend, I gotta say hello. So it's really that connection. A lot of them don't, the only connection they have for those students is here at school.
there's a lot of different activities that are listed on here. Stinson's going to post those on the page, on the web page.
Sense of humor, you know.
Or, I mean, in the drive, so you guys can look at it. The one that I kind of focus on here at the end is just you guys need to realize, like, take advantage of the mindfulness stuff if you haven't already. Look at it. It is beneficial. I know it takes up a lot of time, but there are some pieces of it that if you guys read through the slides, you'd be like, wow, that's kind of cool. Take advantage of just taking that time with the kids and helping them kind of regulate. Take part in it as much as you can. Calm yourselves in those moments. The example that I gave earlier today was I had a group of kids I started doing yoga with. And I'm not a yoga person, like that's not something that I would ever see myself doing, but I had a suggestion that helps with anxiety, and I did it with a couple of kids for a few years, and I noticed a huge recourse, like they were able to rebound, and it stopped preventing them from coming to school. And I offered it to these girls, and they came in 5 times in. I sat down with them and I looked at them and I just said, guys, thank y'all for being consistent, because they're on the mark. They're in there every single morning. Granted, they're probably out of class for 5 or 10 minutes and they're excited about that, but they're in there every morning for me. And I told them, thank you, I appreciate this. I appreciate you guys being consistent and coming in here. This actually, I'm finding is helping me because it settles me, it calms me, it relaxes me right here before I start my day. And they have not missed. They have been very, very consistent. Something simple like that is something that they need to hear, because I'm modeling this is beneficial for me and you're helping me move through this. And I'm being consistent with them, giving them a space to calm down. That is something that none of us take, because those little devices we all like, we don't calm down.
I always say it's good to model mistakes too, because kids need to realize that there's nothing perfect, you know, that we make mistakes. And also that we don't like everybody. I tell them, you know, I don't like everybody in this building, but we still have to respect them. We still have to do what is asked. But understanding, because a lot of them think if you don't like somebody, then you don't do, because that's the way to look at things.
I feel like I don't want to say this comment while I'm being recorded, but no, you're fine. So, taking care of yourself is one of the number one, like it's almost a cursed phrase for teachers. For anyone nowadays, I feel like it's a cursed phrase. Doing what we just talked about with taking that moment break or taking that and just engaging in it, and for that 30 seconds, just letting some of that classroom management go for just a very small period of time, you're actually taking care of yourself and you're getting paid to do so in those moments. Okay? Because most of the time, whenever we look at you and say, hey, go take care of yourself, people are jumping to, oh, I need to go get a massage. Oh, hey, I need to go get my nails done. Oh, hey, I need to go do this. No, you can do that every single day, and it can make you more healthy as you're working with these kids and giving them opportunities and get paid for it.
and find something that's like an outlet. For me, like, I found out, you know, I started knitting. I didn't knit when I was younger, and it's just been something I developed, and all of a sudden, it became a stress reliever. Like when I got home, that's what I did to de-stress. So finding something that works for you, and everybody's different, and the kids are all different. I had a kid bring me yarn yesterday, and he was going to show me how he could crochet, and he was so proud that he could crochet.
So finding the scars you can't see are the hardest to heal. Finding those, knowing that those are there in the back of your mind, not even knowing the detail of what that looks like is important for these kids. And you will help them start to move down that healing process. Just knowing that it's a possibility.